Hi friends, I'm Jesse from shrinkrc.com. The topic of this video is things to consider when building a hardbody RC crawler. Now, the first thing you need to think about is what kind of a truck do you want to build? Are you building a trail truck? Are you building a rock crawler? Or are you building a comp rig? All these things are sold under the category of rock crawler if you go onto a website like Main Hobbies, for example, where you can get Shrink RC body mounts. Now, a trail truck is a truck that is meant for you to take on a walking trail, for example. Say you want to go on a 5-mile walk on a dirt trail that you like to walk on, and it's not got a lot of challenging obstacles on it, but you want to bring a rig along with you that can go through the dirt, go up and down some hills, and go through a little bit of rough riding. And it's not necessarily meant to be going over very difficult obstacles, and instead it's just meant to go along with you for the ride, have some fun, maybe go with some friends, something like that. Well, that would be a trail truck that you're building, and a trail truck isn't going to have the same level of capabilities as a rock crawler or a comp rig. A rock crawler to me is a truck that is a little bit more capable, possibly a linked truck, or it's a leaf spring truck where you've gone and upgraded the leaf springs by going to somebody like Twisted Fab or another person who makes upgraded longer travel leaf springs to increase the capabilities of that leaf spring rig, or you're using a 4-link type rig that is meant for more difficult rock crawling than just going down a trail. Then the extreme end of it would be a comp rig. Sometimes they're called LCG, low center of gravity trucks, or a type of rig that's meant to have really big tires and an unusual shaped frame and be meant for extreme breakover angles, approach angles, and departure angles. It's meant to have super low center of gravity, possibly a very low weight, and you probably use a rig like that in actual competitions that are regulated, or you're taking it onto very extreme types of rock crawling situations where a normal rock crawler or a trail rig wouldn't be able to go. And you need to think about which of those types of rigs that you're building, because that's going to affect your decisions about what type of chassis you use, what size tires you use, and what kind of body you use. In fact, I would say that in most cases, if you want to build a comp rig that is meant for extreme competition situations and extreme climbing capability, you may not want to do a hard body. Hard bodies are heavier than Lexan bodies, and no matter what, your hard body is going to raise the center of gravity of your truck. Now, I know people are going to say, oh, well, my friend has a hard body and he won the local competition against all the Lexan bodies. And well, he's probably a very good driver and he probably has his rig set up very well. But there is a reason that different types of chassis and bodies are sold for different types of trucks, just like in the real world. In the real world, you may have a Toyota, a modern Toyota 4x4 on 35-inch tires that can go places that a Honda Civic cannot go. But it can't go places that a Jeep with a solid axle and 47-inch tires can go. There's limits to what vehicles can do. Nothing bugs me more than hearing somebody say, well, it's just all about the driver and the line choice. Well, I don't care who's driving and what the line choice is. You're not going to take a Honda Civic on the Rubicon. And there's degrees of what you should expect from each of these different types of builds. So without beating that up too much, let's go on to my topics like body selection. One of the things with body selection you're going to want to think about is wheelbase. Do you want a short wheelbase rig, and that's usually 11.4 inch, or do you want a long wheelbase rig, and that's 12.3 inch typically, or a little bit longer? The longer wheelbase rigs are going to be more stable on inclines and declines, but they'll be more likely to get hung up on a breakover. That means if you're going over a sharp peak, then you have more opportunity to snag the underside of the body going over a breakover. So a short wheelbase rig is going to have inherently a better breakover angle than a long wheelbase rig. Another thing you're going to, and by the way, long wheelbases would be the extra cab, it would be the Scottsdale, it would be the Mojave 4-door. A short wheelbase would be the Mojave 2-door, it would be the Blazer, and it would be the 4Runner, as an example. Next thing to consider is the width of the body. The narrowest bodies are the Mojave 2-doors and the Mojave 4-doors. The extra cabs are a little bit wider, and the Chevy bodies, like the Blazer and the Scottsdale, are quite a bit wider. And the reason that matters is how tight of a space are you trying to get these rigs through, and how many obstacles are around you that you're going to get hung up on. So a wider rig, just like in the real world, a wider rig requires different considerations when driving it than driving a very narrow rig. A couple examples of other narrow rigs are the Ford F-350 from Tamiya and the Tamiya Tundra. Those are relatively narrow. One of them is a longer wheelbase, one of them is a shorter wheelbase. But the width of the body is going to affect what you get hung up on, or what you don't get hung up on, and how narrow of a space or how narrow of a ledge you'll be able to go on without interfering with the body. Weight is another consideration with these. The rigs that have opening doors and opening hoods, well, there's metal bits and magnets and extra weight to those doors that have interiors on them. And so you may want to consider a Mojave 2-door, for example, that does not have the opening hood and the opening doors. Now it looks like the Mojave 2-door is gradually being replaced by this new 1982 Toyota and pickup. And it's really similar to the Mojave 2-door, but it's got an opening hood. So the extra cab is heavier than the Mojave 2-door, and the Blazer and the Scottsdale are heavier than the extra cab just because they're really just big bodies. So that weight is going to have an impact on what that truck crawls like as well. And I mentioned the doors too. Now the doors add the extra weight because of the magnets and the metal bits and the door interiors and stuff. But on this extra cab that I built, I actually got rid of all the magnets. I got rid of the hinges, all the screws that are needed for the hinges, and I glued this hood on. I actually grinded away I broke out the magnet in there, grinded that away, and just went through the whole thing and took out every last bit of weight that I possibly could from it. And this is really a pretty capable rig. I don't even have the back seat area in this one. I have the front seats in it, and I even have a driver, and of course he's adding some weight. But for me, when I started filming videos on these and looking at the videos, it looks weird to me now to not see a driver in the vehicle. So I've started to add, you can call them action figures, you can call them dolls if you want to, but I have figures now in most of my trucks because it just looks strange to me to see a truck ghost riding on the trail or on the rocks. Another thing to consider with these is, are Shrink RC body mounts available? I don't make body mounts for every combination of body and every combination of chassis. So if there's a certain body that you are bent on running, or if there's a certain chassis that you're bent on running, you should check and see what body mounts do I offer for that chassis, or what body mounts do I offer for that body, and make sure that the combination you want to build is something I offer, or else you're going to need to plan on building your own body mounts, and that's okay too. I just sometimes have people call me because they've bought a certain type of chassis and they want to put another type of body on it, and I don't offer a body mount for that combination. And I have different reasons why there's some combinations I don't offer, and it usually has to do with how difficult it is to fit that particular body on that particular chassis. If it requires you to buy a whole bunch of extra things and change a whole bunch of things, and there's a lot of research you need to do in order for you to be able to build it, I usually won't offer that body mount. And SCX 10.3 is one of the chassis, for example, that I don't offer any body mounts for. And I have a video on that you can watch. So another thing to consider is your chassis that you want to run. Again, we mentioned wheelbase, so some of the chassis aren't designed to be short wheelbase. They're only designed to be long wheelbase, and making them a short wheelbase is really, really difficult. A good example of that is the Vanquish VRD and the Axial SCX 10 Pro. Those are designed to be long wheelbase rigs. So where I do have body mounts for those, usually it's just the extra cab and the Mojave 4-door, or you can run the Mojave 2-door, 1982 Toyota pickup, whatever you want to call it, as a cab only build. In other words, sort of a truggy style build without a bed. And I do that because on those chassis, it's really kind of a pain to get them short. And so until there's an easier way to shorten those chassis, I'm only going to offer a limited number of bodies for those particular chassis. So think about that before you decide what type of a build you're going to do. Another consideration is leaf springs versus links. Leaf chassis is a TF2, for example. And on the TF2s, the linked chassis are great for trail trucks. If you want to do more serious rock crawling or comp crawling, you're going to need to improve those springs and get an aftermarket, better made, higher travel spring for those. And I think I mentioned Twisted Fab, and Twisted Fab Company is a great resource for getting a longer travel leaf spring that's going to allow you to really get more performance out of that leaf spring suspension. For me, I prefer linked chassis, 4-link rear and 3-link with a panhard in the front. That's mostly what I run, and that is in fact why I started Shrink RC, was so that you could take an RC 4-wheel drive hard body, which hard bodies are my preference, and you could put it on any linked chassis of your choice. Over time, I found out there were people who would like to use my body mounts on factory RC 4-wheel drive chassis as well, so we now offer body mounts for all of the stock RC 4-wheel drive chassis with their bodies as well. Your other consideration you're going to want to make is straight axles versus portals. The consideration with that largely has to do with your center of gravity and looks. A portal axle and, of course, clearance. A portal axle is going to clear more objects under that axle, but it's going to potentially raise the center, well, it will raise the center of gravity of your vehicle because you're taking that weight of that actual axle and you're shifting it upwards. And in some cases, you'll be shifting your entire chassis and body up more too to compensate for that. So you're raising the center of gravity of your vehicle with a portal axle. And even though there are portal axle conversions available for some of the modern vehicles, usually you don't see portal axles on the trail. What you see is solid axles and they're straight axles. And for me, I like the simplicity and the looks, and I like the performance of a straight axle. I like having that center of gravity brought down by the axle being lower. I don't mind missing that little bit of clearance in the middle, and I like the way portals look on the vehicles. One thing you should know, and I talk about this in a lot of other videos, is when you do put a hard body on a linked chassis, you're probably going to need to make some adjustments to your rear links, either adding rod ends to your rear links or getting shorter rear links or making shorter rear links in some cases. Another chassis consideration, let's talk about Element as an example for a minute. With the Element Enduro chassis, I have more body mounts for Element Enduro than any other chassis, but there's a catch. Some of the Elements now come with or have the option of doing the forward transmission. They call it the XF. You have the standard Stealth X transmission, which is in the middle, and then there's a Stealth XF, which is a forward transmission. I've found that you're much better off with the mid-mount original Stealth X transmission if you're doing an Element build. On the forward transmission, it gives you the impression that it's going to sit lower and be more out of the way of the interior, and the problem is that's not the case. It does not sit lower. It's at about the same height, and it winds up being in a place that is awkward and right under your dash, and it's really tall, and you wind up having to cut out all of that area and cut out your dash and cut out the whole front section of the interior, and it's a really poor fit. So that's actually one of the warnings I have on our website, is that if you're running an Element chassis, get the mid-mount transmission, not one with a front-mount transmission. And those are just some of the things to think about if you haven't built one of these before, to keep you from being surprised later on when, hey, I bought this chassis, now I want to put a body on it. You should actually forward think some of these things of make sure that there's going to be a mount available for you and there's going to be a good experience before you pick out what body, what chassis you want to use. Another thing to consider is tire selection when you do hard body builds. With real life trucks, you can run now a 58-inch tire. But if you're going to do that, you need to usually move your front axle forward a little bit, and that's where a portal axle setup actually comes in on these. And what I mean by that is, for our Vanquish body mounts, I make the mounts the same whether it's for a portal axle version or a straight axle version. If you have the portal axles, my assumption is, and I do that, is I'm assuming if you're running portal axles, you're going to want to run bigger tires. And to do that, you need more room. And it just so happens that portal axles from Vanquish have a lot of caster built into them. And that caster shifts the front tires forward of being center of the wheel well, shifts it forward about 5 millimeters. And I purposely leave it like that so that you actually have more room after doing some cutting for those bigger tires. The most common tire sizes are 3.9, 4.19, 4.75, and there's actually sizes all over the place. There's smaller than that, and there's bigger than that, and everything in between. The reason I bring up those sizes, the 3.9 tire is a size that you can run with almost any hard body without having to do any trimming and without having any rubbing. If you go up to a 4.19 size tire on a hard body, you're going to have a little bit of rubbing, and you might need to do a little bit of trimming. Or you might have a little bit of trimming and a little bit of rubbing. If you want to run a very large tire like a 4.75, you get into that situation like with a real 1-to-1 truck where you can't run a 48-inch tire on a stock 1-to-1 truck. You need to do things like shift the axle, lift the body more, and do a lot of cutting on the wheel wells. And I think you can see it back here, I'm not sure, but this Mojave 4-door is a good example of cutting out the wheel wells, let's grab it, and making room for a very large tire. I can't remember what size I've got on this one. They're either 4.6s or 4.75. So this is a case where this is a thing that you'll see on real life Toyotas in the 1-to-1s. When they run real big tires like 48, they'll go through and cut out all this area like this to make room for that tire. So you can run whatever size tires you want, but don't expect to run a 4.75-inch tire on a stock hard body without doing any cutting or lifting or moving things around. It's just not practical, just like in the real world. So your basic sizes are 3.19, no cutting, 4.19, a little bit of cutting, 4.75, you're going to be cutting. Here's an example of 4.19s, and I cut about 5 millimeters off the opening of this wheel well in the front here. And if this had the bed, I would have done the same thing in the back. But these are 4.19s. These tires are actually around 3.7 on this Blazer. And what's nice about these is these actually wind up tucking up into the body because I've got it sitting real low, and it makes it really, really cool when you're crawling it. It looks very realistic, and it has a lot more articulation than you would expect. Really fun rig to drive. This one's an SCX10 too. Love this rig. Another thing to consider when doing a hard body rock crawler is your electronics. And why do I bring that up? Well, hard bodies are heavy, and the extra weight puts more strain on your servo, and especially if you have bigger tires. So consider getting a little bit higher rated servo, spend a little bit more money on your servo, and that will improve how much you enjoy your off-roading experience. When it comes to motors, I bring up motors because on hard bodies, a lot of times finding space for everything is one of the more difficult parts about it, because they have full drop interiors and they have dropped beds, not full drop, but a lot more drop than on a Lexan body. And finding space in hard body builds can be really hard. And one of the things you can do to help that is there's a Fusion Pro, the Hobbywing Fusion Pro and the Hobbywing Fusion SE motors that have the speed controller built into the motor. And by doing that, that's just saving you the space of needing to mount that speed controller somewhere. And then you've got more room for things like your batteries. It's time to talk about dolls. So hard bodies have full interiors on them, and to me they look weird empty, so I buy dolls for them. They're action figures. So these action figures, the ones that I buy, are mostly from Mego. It's M-E-G-O, and they're sold as 8-inch action figures, and they're not really quite 8 inches tall. and it depends on who's measuring it, right? But the 8-inch figures are not quite 8-inch, and the other thing is these trucks aren't really 1 to 10. They're usually more like 1.9, 1.95. In fact, this cruiser is more like 1.85. And so putting a figure in there that's like 7.5 inches tall, it's 7.5, 7.75 tall. It sounds like a way too big figure, but the thing is the next size down is 7-inch figures. And if you look at this guy compared to this, it's too small to me. I think it looks weird. I mean, you tell me what you think. I have friends who run this size, and they fit better inside because you don't have to cut them up to get them to fit in there, and so they'll run this size. But I think the 7-inch looks a little bit too small, the proportions. So these trucks have a high floor in them, and that means the seats are up high. And what that means at that point is I usually wind up cutting the legs off of the figures. I glue their pants back on. I don't know, let's see if you can, I'll make an attempt to show him in here. But he's got pants on, but those pants are empty. There's no legs there. I actually wind up cutting them off kind of right at the pelvis. I cut everything off down below, and that makes them fit just about right inside there to what looks realistic to me. The good thing about cutting off their lower body like that and their legs is you're actually bringing the weight down of the doll as well, so that you're not adding quite so much weight to the interior. But that's just something to throw out there. That's your choice whether you are comfortable playing with dolls or not. I'm confident and comfortable with it, so I play with dolls. Let's see. That is everything that I had written down to go over. I did want to mention that you can go to shrinkrc.com to look up some of the things that we offer. You can also think about joining our club on Facebook, which is the Shrink RC Hardbody Club. And you can always write to me at Jesse, Jesse, Jesse at shrinkrc.com. Thank you. Peace.